Episode number 176 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. So today I wanted to talk about how to hack triggers, because I know that being or going through the fertility journey could be very triggering at times, and many examples can come up. I mean, it could be also just having conversations with family members. Advice could be very triggering. Seeing other people get pregnant, baby showers can be very, very triggering. So a lot of times, a lot of specific questions can be very triggering. So I know that these things do come up. And I've also noticed that everybody handles them very differently. So it really depends on the individual because everybody has different types of triggers and different ways of handling them. So I wanted to talk about that today because, as you know, I'm very interested in the mind. It's always been something interesting for me, and I've always worked or utilized that in my work with people, whether it's online clients or patients in person, because the mind really is at the heart of everything physical. So we go through something physical, it actually does get impacted by our minds. That being said, we should never feel that stress or guilty about feeling stress, because it's just a part of life. And I think a big part of really dealing with anything in general is accepting the fact that stressful situations do come up and we do get triggered, and that is okay. It's okay to get triggered. It's okay for things to come up. It's part of the human experience. It's part of being human. So it's not something you can completely avoid. It's just part of being human in this world and living a life in this earthly realm. And so I think that that is a huge part of it, because sometimes we not only feel triggered or stressed, but we also feel stressed about being stressed. And then that could be triggering in its own. So there are so many different things that can be very triggering. Diet could be triggering. I know that a lot of times when I get patients coming in, if I talk to them about maybe exercising less, if they overexercise, I give them information. I notice that that could be very triggering because they're used to a certain type of lifestyle, and they're also used to believing that doing more exercise is better. So that could be very triggering, and I could totally understand why, because sometimes people's exercise routines really impacts how they feel, and it's become a tool for easing any stress or releasing tension. And that could be very addictive, and it really is something that is very relieving for a lot of people and totally understandable. So those are all triggers. Now, you may know, I don't know if this is the first episode you're listening to or you've been listening to other podcasts or episodes that I've done, but typically my intention and my way of approaching or helping my patients or the people that I work with, it's all about empowerment for me. Ultimately, you cannot always change life, and you can't change certain situations or cards that were dealt. So that's just a given. And because of that, I actually love the serenity prayer, which is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, the way I see it is, if we work and utilize our energy to try to change something we cannot change, then we won't have the energy and the strength to change things that we can change, if that makes sense. And I literally live my life according to that philosophy. I prefer to contain the energy and to store the energy that I have, because personal energy these days is a very, very valuable thing. So I would prefer to hold on to the energy where I can and use it and not use it in places that I can't. I learned this actually from a very personal story. So I know that I didn't go through the fertility journey in the way, I guess the classic way. I mean, I did have issues with my reproductive health before trying to conceive, but I did have a situation where I took care of my father who was passing. And it was a very, very difficult situation to be in, clearly, because a lot of the responsibility was on my shoulders in trying to make sure that he survives in the best possible way. I was really making a lot of decisions. And I remember at that time, there were certain things that were just clearly 100% out of my hands. And I had to really think quickly on what I should expend my energy for. Because I also had, the kids were really little and I was trying to manage everything at the same time. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I use my energy to make this most, to be able to be most effective in helping my father. And ultimately, it really came down to that. I had to conserve my energy because I was on such a deficit already because of the challenging situation that it was. So I found it was just one really strong experience in learning on the fact that there are certain things that you absolutely cannot change, and there are certain things that you absolutely can change, and to really utilize that. And to me, that's just personal energy efficiency. It's the efficiency of your personal energy. So in that, and speaking of that, so when you do have triggers, there are a couple of things you have to ask yourself when you are triggered. In certain circumstances, do you change that situation, or do you work on your trigger or how you are handling it? So in certain circumstances, if you feel like you are just too much in an emotional deficit, which most likely you are because it's a very difficult time, then it is okay to take away those triggers and not worry about how you're responding to it. So in circumstances such as being invited to a baby shower, okay, that is extremely triggering. And if if you're going through difficulties, or more of an emotional, because it is a roller coaster, you go up and down. If you're more on a down where you're just feeling depleted and you just can't give anymore, then in those cases, it is perfectly fine to opt out. And that's okay. And if you're feeling like that even on your good days, then you absolutely have every right to opt out and not even explain yourself. And I think giving yourself that permission and that choice, because you do have that choice, is 100% okay. You have the permission. You should give yourself that permission because it is a difficult time. So it's not about changing the triggers. It's about honoring when you have the triggers and honoring what you are able to do at that moment. So if that moment is just too much for you to handle, that's when you have to put on the brakes and say, you know what? I need to put myself first in this situation, because it's not just putting yourself first, it's really putting your whole family and your future family first. Because ultimately, you need to put your energy towards yourself and your partner. And that is that's like number one priority. And so if that means that you have to say no, then that's what it is. So it's really about setting those boundaries for honoring your emotions and realizing that, yes, there's a trigger here. So ultimately, that's number one. Always honor your emotions where you're at. There is no right or wrong in this fertility journey. It is a complete roller coaster. You're going to have your good days and you're going to have your bad days. And it's okay. All of it is okay. There's no right or wrong in handling anything. But to make it easier for you when you are going through those triggers, it's important to be able to give yourself that time and give yourself that permission to say, you know what? I'm not really handling this right now, and I don't really feel comfortable on how I'm going to feel emotionally in a situation. And I, quite frankly, cannot be happy for somebody else right now. And that is perfectly okay. So that's number one, really honoring where you're at and allowing yourself to say no. And there's no right or wrong in that moment. So knowing when to have those boundaries when you are feeling triggered, knowing that you just can't handle more. And that's when you say, even when you're in conversation, somebody's asking, remove yourself from the situation. It's okay. I really don't want to talk about this right now. Allowing yourself to make those boundaries, I think, is huge when you are going through it and when you feel like it's just too much for you emotionally to handle. And it's not about saying no to other people, it's about saying yes to yourself. So that's definitely number one. On the other hand, if you want to get to the point where you feel emotionally more liberated, this is where the empowerment comes. But again, what I'm about to tell you, you don't have to do until you're ready to do it. It's one of those things that you need to feel ready to do it. But it's very powerful actually. Pema Chodron, she's a meditation teacher. She's a spiritual teacher. She's wonderful. And I've listened to her a lot, and I listened to her audiobook about getting unstuck. I think the book is called Getting Unstuck. And I thought it was really interesting. She talks about the power of stay. So say we are getting a trigger. And again, it's one of those things that you need to be ready for. But the power of stay is sitting with that trigger, sitting with the feelings that come up during that trigger. And what happens when you do that, actually, since we're not like just the mind, we're actually the body as well. And you'll find if you sit with it and get into how your body feels, that you're going to actually feel a lot of whatever you're feeling in your body. And then when you get into your body, instead of staying in your mind, instead of staying in the story of what happened, you actually start to have more of a grasp over it. And it actually can empower you in that situation, in that moment, because then you become more aware of your physicality and how you're responding to that moment. So when you're able to actually get into your physical state, or even move and stretch and breathe while you're going through it to iron it out. Because what happens is you're going to put your attention to like, what is my body feeling right now? And when you bring your body into what is your mind into what is my body feeling right now, asking that question, becoming aware of that, then you're going to start to feel the tension. And you're going to realize like, this isn't pleasant. It's not pleasant. And you're going to feel this unpleasant tension. And that's when you can say it's okay to breathe now. Because sometimes you might even find when it's such an unpleasant feeling, you're going to stop breathing, or you're not going to breathe as deep, very shallow. And then you can give yourself that cue. It's okay to breathe right now. And more so than that, you can even start moving and stretching and kind of releasing or massaging. Even if you feel it like in your belly, you can start massaging. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to release whatever that trigger is, or whatever that block is, because a lot of times triggers tend to be blocks. That's why every time it gets activated, you're going to feel that same block. And what happens with any kind of emotional block, you keep it in place because you tense up. So when you actually get into your body and you start to your awareness gets into your body and you realize where it is, where that stuckness feels, and you breathe through it and you move around while it's activated, you're actually releasing it. So ultimately, that's your absolute power. That's like the power that you have over that trigger. Instead of letting it control you, you actually are working through it. And when you start to do that, when you get into this practice of doing that, little by little, it'll have less of a hold on you. Now, if it starts to have less of a hold on you, it's also going to have less of a hold on you physically, because we are not just the head, we're not just the body, we're the whole thing. This is how I learned about it, and this is how I work with people when I do Chinese medicine. That's how Chinese medicine works. We don't just work on the body, we work on the mind, the spirit, the body, the meridians, the energy, everything. And once you unblock one thing, it actually frees you not only mentally, but physically as well. And that's only going to help your healing process. So it's a win-win. So ultimately, that's your ultimate power. That's like going back into your power center and being able to master it rather than letting it control you. Because ultimately, triggers are that energy body controlling you. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. We all have triggers. It's part of the human experience. So it's perfectly fine to be triggered. And this is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter what kind of guru you are. As a matter of fact, Pema Chodron talked about having a major trigger that she had at a retreat because one person didn't like her and she just felt so uncomfortable in that situation. She kept trying to change it or make the person like her. And, we've all been there as well. So things happen. It doesn't matter how much you meditate. Things keep happening so long as you're alive. So there's no judgment on the fact that you're triggered because that just means you're human. That's a good thing. It's a good thing. It means you're alive. So it's not a matter of not having triggers. It's a matter of working through them and seeing what they are showing you because they're reflecting something in you that you're feeling in your body. And that's when you start to bring that awareness into your body and you start to breathe through it. Now, I never talked about this. This is actually something that I've always felt, and it's something that I practice within myself. And I do when I work with people one-on-one, I do work with them on that. But the reason why I haven't touched the subject yet is because it could be triggering in its own. This topic could be very triggering because it might seem like you're saying not to feel the feelings or you don't have a right to feel that feelings. But I figured out it's not really the case. And I know that I'm not explaining it that way now. Part of doing that or becoming aware of it is actually acknowledging how you're feeling and being truthful with the state of being that you are experiencing or the state that you're experiencing at the moment and honoring that, allowing that to be. So, and not necessarily trying to change what is, but just kind of tuning in with yourself and asking yourself and checking in, what am I feeling in my body? If you start to get into this practice of really getting into your body, then the emotions won't have as strong of a hold on you. And this is actually a meditation practice. It's this mindfulness of connecting. It's interoception, it's called, where you're actually listening to your body's cues. The more you become in tune with what your body's telling you, you're also going to become more intuitive when you're eating. You're going to become more intuitive when you pick a good doctor or a doctor that aligns with you. You're going to be intuitive on the decisions that you make because you're intuitive with your body. You're feeling your body. You're honoring and listening to what your body's telling you. So ultimately, it's a practice and it takes time. And at first, especially if the trigger is really big, it could be overwhelming, which is why I say it's important to be ready to do this practice. You have to be ready. If you're really, really deep in it, then it's just not the time. It's too much. So when you're ready, it's something that you might be ready for, then you sit with it. If the emotion is too overwhelming to handle, you don't sit with it. You just go by what your body tells you and when you're ready to open up. And you'll feel when the right time is ultimately. But it really comes down to just listening and honoring yourself, just like you would anybody else. Sometimes we kind of dismiss our own emotions. We'll put other people's emotions and feelings above ours. It's a matter of really loving yourself, giving yourself that love, giving yourself that honoring, that grace through the process, the forgiveness and the compassion throughout everything, and not having this high expectation and feeling guilt for not matching or doing something or being at a certain level that you think you should be, because there is no right or wrong. That's really ultimately what it is. And I remember having a teacher, it was a health teacher actually, and she talked also about mental health, which is beautiful. She talked about all the different aspects of our well-being. So I thought that was very interesting because it was back in like early 90s, late 80s. And I think it was in middle school, and she said, and I will never forget this, she said, feelings are not right or wrong, they just are. And I found that statement to be so liberating because as soon as you realize that feelings are not something to be judged, then, to allow them, it's just so liberating because then you feel like, okay, I could just be. This is just where I'm at, and that is okay. And as soon as you do that, you just feel so much more free. So I hope that this gave you at least a level of permission that you can give yourself through your fertility journey and your process to know that wherever you're at is exactly where you need to be, and it's all good. It's all good. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hope you have a beautiful day. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.